May 29th, 1453. Before dawn, the walls of Constantinople, walls that had stood unbroken for over 1,000 years, finally give way. By the end of that single day, the Byzantine Empire, the last direct continuation of the Roman Empire, ceases to exist. It had lasted, depending on how you count it, close to 1,500 years. Here is the detail almost nobody expects. The weapon that finally broke those legendary walls was built by a Christian engineer who first offered it to the Byzantine emperor, and was turned away because the emperor couldn't afford to pay him. That engineer then walked across the city and sold the same design to the Ottoman Sultan instead. The Sultan was Mehmed II, 21 years old, determined to finish what generations of Ottoman rulers before him had failed to do. The emperor was Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last in an unbroken imperial line stretching back to Constantine the Great, and before him, to ancient Rome itself. Before we go further, everything in this video is drawn from documented history, contemporary Byzantine and Ottoman chronicles, eyewitness accounts from both inside and outside the city, and the work of modern historians who have studied this siege in detail. This is the Fall of Constantinople, 1453. By the mid-15th century, the once mighty Byzantine Empire had shrunk to almost nothing, essentially the city of Constantinople itself, along with a scattering of nearby territory. The Ottoman Empire, by contrast, had spent over a century expanding around it in every direction, absorbing most of the Balkans and Anatolia, until Constantinople stood as an isolated Christian enclave surrounded almost entirely by Ottoman territory. Constantinople's defenses had turned back siege after siege for over 1,000 years, largely thanks to the Theodosian Walls, a system of triple fortifications, moat, outer wall, and massive inner wall, considered among the most sophisticated defensive works of the medieval world. No enemy had managed to breach those land walls by direct assault in the entire history of the city. Mehmed II, who became Sultan in 1451, made the conquest of Constantinople his central objective almost immediately. And to break walls that had defeated every attacker before him, he needed a weapon nobody had used at this scale before: massive siege cannons capable of firing enormous stone projectiles directly into fortifications built to withstand anything smaller. That is where the engineer comes in. His name was Orban, generally described in sources as a Hungarian, or possibly Transylvanian German, cannon founder. According to multiple historical accounts, Orban first approached Emperor Constantine XI, offering to build cannons for Constantinople's defense. The emperor was interested, but the Byzantine treasury, drained by decades of decline, could not meet Orban's price and could barely feed him. Orban left the city and offered his services to Mehmed II instead, who paid him generously and gave him the resources to build on a scale Constantinople never could have afforded. Orban built Mehmed an enormous bombard, sometimes called the basilica cannon in later accounts, reportedly capable of firing stone balls that could weigh several hundred kilograms. It, along with a number of other large cannons Orban helped design, would become the single most important tool in bringing down walls that had never fallen to force in over 1,000 years. The siege itself began on April 6, 1453. Mehmed's forces, estimated by modern historians at somewhere between 50,000 and 80,000 combat troops, alongside additional irregular and support forces, surrounded the city by land, while an Ottoman fleet moved to blockade it by sea. Defending the city was a force historians generally place at somewhere around 7,000 to 8,000 men, a mix of Byzantine soldiers, along with a crucial contingent of Genoese professional soldiers led by Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a skilled Italian condottiere who had come to help defend the city, plus a smaller number of Venetians and other allies. For weeks, Ottoman cannons pounded the Theodosian Walls in continuous bombardment, slowly grinding away at fortifications that had never faced artillery of this scale. Byzantine defenders worked constantly to repair breaches at night, using whatever materials were available, buying time the city desperately needed. One of the most remarkable moments of the siege came when Mehmed, blocked from directly entering the Golden Horn, the harbor protected by a heavy chain boom the Byzantines had stretched across its entrance, ordered his ships hauled overland on greased wooden rollers, around the blockade, and relaunched directly into the harbor behind Byzantine defenses. This documented maneuver allowed Ottoman naval forces to threaten the city's seawalls directly, forcing the defenders to stretch their already thin numbers even further to cover new points of attack. By late May, after nearly 7 weeks of continuous bombardment and assault, the walls were failing in multiple places. On the night of May 28 into May 29, Mehmed launched his final decisive assault, sending in waves of troops in careful sequence, first irregular forces, then Anatolian regular troops, and finally his elite Janissary infantry, held in reserve for the decisive push. During the fighting, Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, the Genoese commander whose professional troops had anchored much of the city's defense, was seriously wounded and withdrew from the walls to receive treatment, a moment several historians identify as critical, since his absence contributed to a collapse in defensive coordination at exactly the point Ottoman forces achieved their breakthrough. Separately, a smaller postern gate known as the Kirkaporta was found open. During the chaos of the final assault, allowing Ottoman troops an additional path into the city's defenses. Emperor Constantine XI reportedly discarded the imperial regalia that would have marked him as a target for capture, and joined his remaining soldiers in the final fighting at the walls. He was killed in the chaos of that last assault. His body was never definitively identified afterward, and the exact circumstances of his death remain something historians can only reconstruct from fragmentary and sometimes conflicting contemporary accounts. By the morning of May 29, 1453, Ottoman forces controlled the city. Mehmed II entered Constantinople and among his first acts, rode to the great church of Hagia Sophia, for nearly 1,000 years the most important church in Eastern Christianity, and ordered to convert it into a mosque, a role it would hold for the following centuries. The Byzantine Empire, the direct continuation of the Roman state founded well over 1,000 years earlier, ceased to exist as a political entity that day. So what did this actually change, beyond one city changing hands? Constantinople became the new Ottoman capital, renamed over time to Istanbul, and served as the seat of Ottoman power for the following centuries, as the empire grew into one of the most significant powers in world history, stretching eventually from North Africa to the gates of Vienna. Historians also widely point to the fall of Constantinople as a major factor, though not the sole cause, in the westward migration of Greek scholars and classical manuscripts into Western Europe, a movement that fed directly into the intellectual currents of the Renaissance, already gathering strength in Italy at the time. And many historians treat 1453 as a convenient traditional marker for the end of the medieval period in European history, largely because it removed the last living political link to the ancient Roman world. Though scholars are careful to note this is a useful dividing line for teaching history, not a single overnight transformation of European society. Here is the irony worth sitting with, the one buried in the very first minutes of this story. The engineer whose cannons finally broke walls that had stood for over 1,000 years first tried to sell his skills to the empire he ended up helping to destroy. Constantine XI turned Orban away for lack of money. Mehmed II paid him. And the weapon built from that single decision ended not just a city's independence, but the final unbroken thread connecting the modern world back to ancient Rome itself. Sometimes the difference between an empire's survival and its final collapse isn't a failure of courage or strategy. Constantine XI and his small garrison fought with real skill and real bravery for 7 weeks against overwhelming odds. Sometimes it's simply a matter of which side could afford to build the better cannon. This has been the Fall of Constantinople, 1453.